So, we've got quite a bit going on this morning because Sally thought it'd be a really good idea to be able to video the service. So, or not the whole service, just me talking softly. So Andrew will be doing that on my phone, and she can never remember my password. So the handovers might not be as seamless as they normally are. However, what we are doing is looking at the God of mission. I'll explain why that is. Because since Sally, Andrew and myself went to a conference called Leading Your Church into Growth, we introduced a prayer, which is okay, we're not going to say this one, we're going to say it later, but it is the one that's over on the left-hand side. And we introduced it to everyone. That came from that conference. It's about mission, and we've been saying it every week. But it's easy for that prayer just to become part of the furniture, something that's familiar, and the words just wash over us as we take them for granted. But the words of the prayer are intentional, and they're meant not just to make us think, but to be changed by it and shaped by it. That is the point of prayer. So we thought it would be a really good idea to do a series on the word of that prayer. And as a pre-introduction, Sally spoke on the parable of the sower. You may remember she did get really excited by that. And it's a really good idea, and that's why the parable of the sower is actually on the right-hand side, because it just fitted so perfectly with the idea of what God's mission means. And the prayer does start with the words, God of mission. So that's our opening thing that we're going to do. But what do we think of when we think of the word mission? All organisations have mission statements. This one is Tesco's. Serving our customers, communities and planet a little better every day. Possibly farmers might find that a little bit hard to say, but there you go. That is their mission statement. And actually, the next one, the one for NASA, does put Tesco's a bit in the shade. Theirs is this: to explore the unknown in air and space, innovate for the benefit of humanity, and inspire the world through discovery. That's quite a reach, isn't it? But I have to say, theirs is nothing compared to this group's, which is its 5-year mission to explore strange new worlds, seek out new life and new civilizations, and to boldly go where no man has gone before. You now may hum the theme tune. Slightly more earthbound, this man has also come up with his mission. His declared mission is that as your new leader, to bring back hope, which is lovely. We'll see if the voters agree with him in a couple of years' time. And the next one, this man, well, he was always given the opportunity to refuse his mission, but he never did refuse. So it seems like everybody has a mission, and these statements have two things in common. First of all, the mission belongs to that person. There are lots of ours and my in these examples. And the second is that it involves a lot of hard work. So it isn't surprising that when we think of what mission means for us as Christians, we probably think of activities being done by us, people going out to faraway lands, or big mission events like this one. This is Billy Graham from 1984 Mission England. We talk about mission committees, mission initiatives, mission giving, mission weeks, and mission projects. So we might think of mission as something the church does, something organised by the church and carried out by the church, in fact by particularly enthusiastic Christians, whilst others just stare ahead hoping they won't be chosen. But the Bible gives us a completely different picture. Mission does not begin with the church. Mission begins with God. Before there was a church to send anyone anywhere, there was a God who was already reaching out to his creation. And before Jesus said, "Go and make disciples," God had already sent his Son into the world. And that means perhaps the most important thing we can understand about mission is this: we are not the owners of that mission. We are invited to participate in God's mission. This service is about what that means. I've chosen 4 C's that will help us to understand the character of the mission that God has started and invites us to join in. That will unfold through the service. We'll also be taking a look at the green leaflet that you've received from Andrew when she was passing them out to you. So please do keep hold of that. That's not just a piece of paper for today. That's to take us through the rest of the service, the sermon series, and beyond. The Isaiah passage stays, "See, I am doing a new thing." As we've already said, God doesn't wait for us to start mission. He starts it, and creativity is part of his core being. He is the creator of all things, and he initiates things and then asks if we can see it happening. He starts by saying, "Do not remember the former things," which might seem a strange thing to ask us to not dwell on the past, because surely the message of our mission, of our God, is reminding ourselves and everyone what God has done for us. The Bible's constantly telling us to remember creation, Abraham, Moses, the Exodus, the covenants God made with us, the cross, the resurrection. So why does God now say, "Do not remember the former things"? Well, the answer is that he's not telling us to forget his faithfulness, which is what all those acts show. He's telling us not to become trapped by remembering how things were. In other words, if he was to say it, he'd say, don't assume that because I acted in one particular way in the past, I can only act in that way again. Don't reduce me to what you already know. Don't put limits on what I can do because you think you know how the story is supposed to go. We might think that mission can only happen in a particular way, that God can only speak to me in the way that he did that time and way in the past, and therefore that's how he speaks to everybody. We can spend so much time remembering what God did that we fail to notice what God is doing now. We may also think that God can't possibly act now as a result of that. We can think society is different, culture is different, we communicate differently, the questions people ask are different. But God hasn't changed, and the gospel hasn't changed, and God's capacity to do something new hasn't changed either. The only thing that changes is his creativity in being more creative. God says, now it springs forth. In this passage, I chose it because it echoes the parable of the sower that Sally talked about a couple of weeks ago. You put a seed in the ground. For a while, nothing appears to happen. But underneath the surface, something is happening. And if you look carefully, a tiny shoot does appear. Life does emerge. Something new is beginning. God invites us to recognise the signs of his activity, and we have to look out for them because they will be in the small things to start with. The leaflet that we've handed out, one of the things it says, it asks you to encourage one person this week. That's the seed that we're planting. That's the tiny shoot that we will see. That is where God will be inviting us to join in with him. And those tiny seeds will spring up and we will see streams in the wasteland. That is God being creative in mission. So in this passage we see 2 other aspects of God's mission. First of all, we see him being compassionate. Matthew tells us that Jesus went about the towns and villages, teaching, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and curing every disease and sickness. There is something wonderfully active about Jesus in this passage. He doesn't sit and wait for people to come to him. He goes to them. Jesus enters their communities, he walks their roads, he encounters people in the places where they actually live. And then Matthew tells us something very important about what Jesus sees. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them. Jesus sees the crowds, but he doesn't see a crowd. He sees individual people. people with hopes and fears, people who are lonely, struggling, looking for meaning. When Matthew describes Jesus as having compassion, it has a depth to it. Jesus is moved in his very being by what he sees. People touch his heart. And that is where God's mission begins, not with a statement or a strategy, but with compassion. Sometimes we can look at the world and see problems. Jesus looks at the world and sees people whom God loves. We look at our community and see lack of interest. Jesus sees men and women, children and families, each one made in the image of God. Sometimes we look at the person who seems difficult. Jesus sees someone precious to the Father. The leaflet you have asks us to perform one practical act of kindness. When we do that, we're learning to look at people as Jesus looks at them. Then Jesus observes that the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. And that leads us on to the third characteristic that I've chosen to look at. What is our most important contribution to it? Well, from the observation Jesus has made, you might think that it would be to hold more committee meetings, raise more money, print more leaflets, basically work harder since there are so few of us. But no. It's to ask the Lord of the harvest to send out labourers into his harvest. In other words, pray. Pray for each other. Pray for those who need God. Pray for those who find God. Pray for those who don't. Mission begins with prayer, and the leaflet asks us to pray for 3 people each week. Not only is it important for us to understand that mission starts with prayer, that also tells us something fundamental about the God of mission. God is already the Lord of the harvest. The harvest belongs to him. The people we encounter belong to him. The people we will meet tomorrow belong to him. God is already present in all these places. It underlines that mission is not about taking God somewhere where he isn't. It's about recognising where God is already at work and joining him there. We don't have to think that we have to transform the world by ourselves. We don't have to carry the weight of everybody's salvation on our shoulders. We don't have to have all the answers. We don't have to become somebody else. We simply need to be available as ourselves to the God who is already at work. Thank you, Ian. You can rest now. No more readings. The fact is, no matter how we address mission and what we say about it, there is the challenge where Jesus says to us, "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded to you." There is a point where being a follower of Jesus isn't just about being nice or kind to people, or even praying in private for them. It's about standing up for the gospel that Jesus has given to us. Up until now, I hope you've been encouraged by what I've said, but I suspect this is the bit where you start to wilt inside, where you think, no, I'm not really ready, I'm not really up for that. That's an ask too far. So let's look at the group that Jesus said this to. 11 disciples who had followed him through thick and thin, who had seen him die, but who had also seen him resurrected. Surely you couldn't get much better inspiration than that. Well, let's test that out. 11 disciples is the first issue. Obviously it's 11. There were 12, but Judas had rather blotted his copybook at this point. The number is important. I don't want to get all mystical about numbers, but the Bible does use them to advertise God's perfection. 3, 4, 7, and 12 all represent God's perfection in different ways. Anything that falls short of that is not perfect. 11 disciples were not a perfect group. It would be a while before they were back to 12. They were a group in transition, unsettled by events. And then there's the interesting, almost casual comment that they worshipped him, but some doubted. In other words, a number of them weren't exactly in the best state of mind for hearing what Jesus had to say to them. Well, we are an imperfect group of people who have come together to worship our God. And I have to say at this point that the only time I would ever use the word wicked in relation to God is with his sense of humour. Because I've written this passage here, and what's happened through this service, we've got a screen that's tied up with string. We forgot to tell Ian when to come up for his readings. I got the hymn in the wrong order. And there were plenty of other things that you'll see between me and Andrew, which we usually have our implosions when we're writing the service. We nearly had it in the service. Yeah, we're an imperfect group of people, but we have come together to worship God. You've come to worship God with your own imperfections today. I'm an imperfect reader. Sally is an imperfect vicar. We'll edit that bit out. Actually, we won't. Because the point is, we are exactly like that first group of people that Jesus gave this commission to. We are imperfect individually and collectively. And it's why, having given the Great Commission, he closes with this promise that he is with us always to the end of the age. So just as God is already at work waiting for us to join him, Jesus is also at work in us so that we are able to join him. And as we work through the riches of this prayer, hold on to that promise.